You know that moment when everything you thought was solid just cracks? Not slowly. Not with warning. 1 second you're sitting at a dinner table, surrounded by the people your wife calls her closest friends, and the next second the sound of her hand against your face cuts through every conversation in that room. Dead silence. All eyes on you. And the worst part? She didn't look sorry. She looked like she'd been waiting to do that for a long time. That night I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't give anyone the satisfaction of watching me break. I stood up, folded my napkin onto the table, looked at her one last time, and then I walked out. I went home, packed a bag, and I vanished. No text. No call. No dramatic note on the pillow. Just gone. And what happened in the weeks that followed? That's what this story is really about. Welcome to the Payback Files. Let me take you back to the beginning so you understand the full picture, because none of this makes sense without the context. My name is Marcus. I'm 38 years old, I work in commercial real estate, and for 6 years I was married to a woman named Diana. Diana was charming, clever, and the kind of person who could make everyone in a room feel like they were her favorite person. I fell for that version of her hard. What I didn't understand until much later was that the version she showed the world was a performance. And I was the only one paying the real price for the life behind the curtain. We had our problems like any couple. But somewhere around year 4, things shifted in a way I couldn't quite name at the time. Diana started pulling away emotionally while simultaneously becoming more demanding in every other direction. I worked longer hours to give us financial security, and she interpreted that as neglect. I tried date nights, planned trips, made efforts I thought were obvious, and she'd dismiss them in front of others like they were embarrassing attempts. Looking back, I was managing her moods constantly, walking on eggshells I couldn't even see. Her birthday was in March. She'd organized a dinner at a restaurant she loved. One of those places with low lighting and overpriced entrees where everyone talks quietly and acts important. There were 12 people there. Her 2 sisters, her best friend from college, 3 of her work colleagues, and a few couples I barely knew but had apparently made the guest list. I had arranged the reservation, paid the deposit, ordered her gift 3 weeks in advance. A sapphire bracelet she'd pointed to once in a window and claimed she'd never get for herself. The dinner started fine. Wine poured, appetizers came, laughter all around. I was quiet, which was normal for me in group settings, and I was happy to let Diana shine because it was her night and I genuinely wanted that for her. What I didn't know was that she'd been building to something all week. She'd been irritable and distant at home, and I chalked it up to work stress and birthday anxiety. I should have paid more attention to the temperature she was carrying into that room. It was during the main course. Someone asked me about a project I was working on, and I answered, maybe 2-3 sentences. Nothing boastful, nothing that took the attention away from Diana for more than a moment. But Diana's face changed. I saw it before I understood it. And then, with 12 people watching, she said something sharp about me always making everything about myself. And before I could even respond, her hand came across the table and caught me square on the cheek. You don't process something like that in real time. Your brain just kind of freezes. I felt the sting. I heard the gasp from the seat to my left. I watched the wine glass near her hand wobble. And then I became acutely, uncomfortably aware of every set of eyes at that table. Some looked horrified. Some looked curious. One of her sisters had her hand over her mouth. Her best friend was staring at her plate like it suddenly became the most interesting thing in the world. And Diana? Diana lifted her glass, took a long sip of wine, and said, "Maybe now you'll think before you speak." Like that was the end of it. Like that was a reasonable and justified conclusion to whatever story she was telling herself. I sat with that for about 45 seconds. Then I put my napkin on the table and I left. I drove home in a silence so thick I could barely breathe through it. And by midnight, I had a bag packed, and I was at my brother Daniel's apartment 40 minutes across town. Here is what I want you to understand about what happened next, because this is where most people in my position make a critical mistake. The instinct after something that humiliating is to react loudly, to call back, to send the angry texts, to show up and demand an explanation, to let the wound turn you into something volcanic. I felt all of that. I won't pretend otherwise. But there was something else underneath it, something cooler and more precise, and I chose to listen to that voice instead. I did not contact Diana that night. I did not contact her the next morning. Daniel knew to stay quiet about my location. I turned off my read receipts, cleared my status, and let the silence expand. And I want to tell you what silence does to someone who just slapped their spouse in front of 12 witnesses and expected submission. It terrifies them. Not because they regret what they did, at least not right away, but because the absence of reaction breaks their script entirely. Diana sent the first text at 1 in the morning. Really, Marcus? You're going to be dramatic about this? That single message told me everything I needed to know about where her head was. She wasn't apologizing. She was already rewriting what happened into a story where I was the problem. I read it, put my phone face down, and went to sleep. By morning there were 11 more messages. They moved through stages like weather, irritation, then confusion, then something that almost looked like concern, then back to irritation again. I didn't respond to any of them. I called my attorney instead. Not to file anything immediately, but to understand what I was looking at and what my options were. My attorney, a woman named Patricia who I'd used for business contracts before, sat across from me at 9 in the morning with coffee in hand and walked me through a landscape I hadn't prepared for, but needed to understand. What I learned in that meeting reshaped how I thought about the entire situation. Diana and I had separate finances for the most part, something she'd actually insisted on early in the marriage, which meant there was less entanglement than there might have been. What we did share was the house, which was in both our names, and a joint savings account we used for shared expenses. Patricia said nothing to me yet, asked a lot of careful questions, and told me to document everything I could remember about the incident while it was still fresh. I went home that afternoon, Diana wasn't there, and I wrote 4 pages. Meanwhile, something unexpected was happening in the social sphere. One of the couples at the dinner, a pair named Trevor and Simone whom I'd met maybe twice before, reached out independently to check on me. Simone texted my number, she had it from a group message thread Diana had made for the dinner, and said simply, "That was wrong. I hope you're okay." I didn't know what that would turn into yet, but I saved that message. I saved every message I received from anyone who acknowledged what had happened. 2 of the 12 people at that table reached out to me with concern. The other 10 either said nothing or, as I later learned, were in Diana's orbit receiving a version of events that painted my departure as an overreaction to a playful tap. That reframe was fast and deliberate. By the second day, Diana had already begun running damage control, calling her sisters, texting her colleagues, carefully shaping a narrative. But she didn't account for the fact that Trevor and Simone had seen it clearly and weren't interested in participating in revision. Day 4 of my absence, Diana called my mother. This was a calculated move. My mother loves Diana, had loved her since the beginning, and Diana was banking on my mother calling me and applying pressure to come back and work things out. My mother did call. She was gentle and measured, which is her nature, and she asked me to explain what had happened from my side. I told her exactly what occurred. No embellishment, no performance, just the facts in the order they happened. There was a long pause after I finished. Then my mother said, "I didn't raise you to tolerate being hit, Marcus." And that was that. By day 7, I had relocated some of my essential documents from the house. I had copies of our financial records, both joint and individual. I had receipts for the bracelet, the restaurant deposit, and every other expense connected to her birthday that I had personally covered. I was not doing this out of spite. I was doing this because I understood that what comes next requires preparation, and preparation requires information. Emotion is expensive. Clarity is an asset. Diana finally shifted tactics around the 10-day mark. The texts changed tone entirely. Gone was the defensiveness, gone was the framing of my departure as drama. In its place came something that looked like genuine remorse. Long paragraphs about stress and pressure, and how she hadn't meant for things to go that far, and how she'd been in a dark place, and she needed me to come back, so they could talk. I read each one carefully. Not because I was softening, but because I was reading for what was actually there beneath the language. What was actually there was fear. Not guilt. Fear. Diana was afraid of what my absence meant practically. She was afraid of what the people at that dinner were thinking and saying. She was afraid of the story losing its shape. And somewhere underneath all of that, I think she was finally afraid of me, not in a physical sense, but afraid of the version of me that could simply leave and not come crawling back. She had never seen that version before. She had always been dealing with a Marcus who managed his own discomfort quietly and stayed. I agreed to one phone call at the 2-week mark. I want to be honest about why, not because I was considering reconciliation, but because I wanted to hear her account of events in her own words. People reveal enormous amounts in those conversations if you stay quiet and let them. Diana talked for 20 minutes before I said anything of substance. And in those 20 minutes she managed to reframe the slap as a reflexive response to feeling invisible, compared herself to someone under extraordinary stress, mentioned 3 separate times that she had never done anything like that before as though repetition made it a credential, and ended by asking what she could do to fix it. I said, "I don't think that's the question." She asked what I meant. I said, "The question isn't what you can do to fix it. The question is whether you understand what you did." There was silence for a long time.
I filed for separation.
Then she said she understood.
The papers
she'd
were
gone
served
too
on
far.
a Tuesday morning.
I said,
Diana called me
"Going
7
too far
times in the
suggests
following
you were on
4
the right
hours.
road.
I didn't
You
answer.
weren't.
I had
And
Patricia
I ended the
handle
call.
all communication
Here is
from
where
that
the
point
story
forward.
turns.
The
And
house
I
went
want you
into
to
a
stay
legal
with me
holding
through this
pattern
turn
while the
because it's
process
important.
moved forward.
What I did
I was
next
staying at
wasn't
Daniel's,
dramatic.
which was fine.
It wasn't a
Daniel is one of
spectacle.
those people who
Real
offers
payback,
space without
the kind
filling
that
it with
lasts,
questions,
the kind that means
and I
something,
needed that more than I
is
needed
rarely
comfort.
spectacular in
What
the
happened in
moment.
the weeks that
It is
followed was a
quiet
slow
and
unwrapping
steady
of a truth,
and built
I had
on
been
a
living
foundation of
inside without being
self-respect
able
that
to
the
see
other
clearly.
person cannot
Financial
erode
documents
because
told a
you have
story.
taken yourself out
The
of
joint
their
account
reach.
had been used for expenses Diana had never mentioned, expenses that bore no connection to our shared life. These weren't catastrophic amounts, but they were consistent, and they were hidden, and their presence recontextualized a pattern of behavior I had been absorbing for years without naming. The social landscape shifted too. Gradually, without my orchestration. People who had been in Diana's corner started asking questions she couldn't answer satisfactorily. The narrative she'd constructed required everyone to believe simultaneously that I was neglectful and that I had overreacted to something minor. Those two things don't coexist easily in the minds of reasonable people, and over time, the story started to develop fractures. Trevor and Simone were not silent. They had seen what they had seen, and they said so when asked directly. Here is the thing about people who operate the way Diana does: they rely on having the story first. If they can frame events before anyone else does, they hold enormous power. What undid her wasn't anything I did actively. It was the simple fact that I removed myself from her narrative entirely and let the gaps speak. When you stop participating in someone's story, the story has to survive on its own. And stories built on distortion rarely do. The divorce was finalized 9 months after that birthday dinner. The settlement was fair, not generous to me, not punishing to her, just fair, which is all I had ever wanted from any part of this. I kept my professional contacts, my financial footing, and more importantly my integrity intact. I never made a public statement. I never sent a devastating text to mutual friends. I never performed my pain for an audience. I just moved through the process with as much steadiness as I could hold on to. The last thing I want to say before I close this out is for anyone sitting right now in a version of that restaurant chair. Maybe yours wasn't a physical slap. Maybe it was something quieter, consistent humiliation or public dismissal, or the slow erosion that comes from living alongside someone who has decided that your dignity is negotiable. Whatever form it took, I want you to hear this. The most powerful thing you can do is not what they expect. They expect reaction. They expect you to stay and absorb it, or to explode and give them something to point to. What they cannot prepare for is stillness. What they cannot script around is your refusal to participate in a dynamic that costs you your self-respect. The real payback isn't in the confrontation. It's in the life you build after you walk away from someone who never deserved your steadiness. It's in waking up on a morning when your name belongs only to you, and finding that silence isn't something to survive anymore. It's actually something that sounds like peace. This has been the Payback Files. If this story stayed with you, come back for the next one. Every story here is about the same thing, at its core. What it costs to stay and what it costs to leave, and why understanding the difference is the only thing that sets you free.